Good evening. My name is Zach Hughes. This is Hot Topics, and welcome back, everybody. It is September 26, 2025, and I am your host, Zach Hughes. It is a relatively calm evening here in the capital of Vermont, and here's what we are going to cover tonight. Tonight, we are going to start a series about living in public housing and, and the struggles of public housing and the triumphs. And then we are going to look at the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Lots of people talk about it. They claim they have a First Amendment right, but what does that really mean? And what does it cover for the most part? Then we are going to go into the looming government shutdown, and I'm hoping to get a couple more things in inside this hour. Okay, before we get going tonight, I am going to put in the chat, and after the show, I will put it in the comments. This is going to be the Hot Topics Facebook page. This is a place you can go for special updates. And you can also see the shows there. I believe I'm rebuilding it a little bit. So, just seeing if that went through. I don't know if it did. I think it did. Um, and so give that a click. I want to give some shout out. I want to give a shout out tonight to JD Green. He's the host over at Aired Out. I got interviewed by him earlier this week, and he has encouraged me to look at possibly doing the show a little more often. I will figure out how to do that. And right now, we were trying for a weekly uh, show, but it's possible we could bring that up. I also want to let viewers know that a little later this month, no, a little later in October, early October, maybe mid October, um, Hot Topics is looking to do a show, but it will be done on Orca. And my guest for that show is going to be a special guest. His name is David Hinault, and he's going to talk about running for office. He's interested in running for governor. So we will have that show in October. Okay. And that's going to be on Orca, though. So I usually do the show on YouTube or Facebook. I am coming back to YouTube, though, right now. Okay. So let's get into, a um, a topic here, and I was inspired by a gentleman, and I'm hoping to have him on my show. I'll figure out how to do it, and we're going to talk about his experience a little bit. But I want to talk about public housing a little bit, and basically what it's like to live in public housing. Um, and I want to talk. It's going to be a series. So tonight I'm going to kind of do an overview of what it's like, um, and I encourage viewers to discuss it in the chat or discuss it in the section outside the chat. There'll be a section, I believe, when you view the show, you can do comments there. And since this is YouTube, it it kind of varies around the United States, I'm sure. But let's um, let's get into it. So I was inspired by this gentleman who called me up and let me know that he was having a hard time with a neighbor keeping him up at night. and he does a show too, and it's called Abled and On Air. And I encouraged him to do a show on it, but I kind of thought, why not jumpstart the conversation now? And yes, at some point in the series, we will try to have a few guests on the show if I can get them to come on. Um, we might do a joint aired out as I'm not aired out, but that'd be interesting, JD. It might be interesting to do an aired out too on it, but I am thinking, let's talk about the reality of it and talk about, instead of pointing fingers at neighbors, let's talk about the challenges and the triumphs of living in a public housing um, building. Um, first of all, I want to just say my intention here is not to be critical of public housing after I live in public housing, but merely to educate the situation a little bit from all sides. And so that we're not just pointing, fingers here. And so I'm gonna start out with this and talk about I'll start with my experience in public housing generally and go from there. I have lived in a public housing building for almost 23 years. It's probably it is actually the longest place I've ever lived. So let's start out with what it's generally like. So this building is for disabled and elderly folks together. We live together, in a building. This building, I believe, has around 28 other tenants, somewhere in there. And it is still relatively new compared to other buildings in the housing stock for the public housing here. But let's. So, what are some of the advantages? I'd rather not start with the pitfalls. Let's start with the advantages of this arrangement. Like most, it takes the rent is 30% of your income, and you have to meet qualifications to come into this type of housing. You typically apply. There's typically right now. My last check, there was a 10-year waiting list for this building. However, depending on the situation, it might be shorter. Depending on the situation, it only took me 7 months to get in here, but I did have other choices. I didn't have to come here. I could have chosen another building. I chose this one. So what's that like living in a public housing building? Well, it's like living in any apartment building typically. The thing I need to emphasize is I came from an apartment building on a Section 8 voucher before. So, it's similar to living. You have to get along with people. You have to be able to get along a little bit with people, and you have to be able to tolerate their differences. It's when I first came here, I was the youngest tenant in the building. I no longer share that distinction. But that's challenging too. So when you are the youngest tenant in a building, it can be very hard to get along with others because we all have to get used to each other. We have our ways. I had lots of younger friends. They were around my age, so they'd come over, visit, And meanwhile, the elderly folks here were not used to that. So, that typically is an issue. There are also expectations and rules. Um, and, yes, neighbors do call you in for things, and things can get kind of interesting. This assumption that we're all a community and we should get along is very hard to actually get reality in. Um, you know, so what can be difficult about living in a building, uh, housing building? I I think the most difficult thing about living in a public housing situation is we have a mix of folks here. And we all have to try to get along. And I feel very sorry for the housing staff because they have to deal with or try to get people to coexist. Um, and I think one of my inspirations to start this series was my friend across town who was really upset about loud noise at night. And if you're not used to that, that can become a problem. Um, I have been there and had that happen where there's loud noise, and usually, if you're not used to it, it's not good. Um, but we all have to kind of coexist, and that's really what's important here. Um, so, you know, I think one of the reasons I moved into this building was into this, type of housing was the accessibility and the enclosed nature of the building. Like the apartment I lived in before, the driveway was a mess in the winter and I had a hard time getting out. And I figured living in a building like this, I'd be able to connect with other people. There's a community room. You can, you know, use these public spaces in the building. Um, Most of these buildings actually contain a community space where you can have meetings and bring in other organizations. But um, what is hard about this, I think the biggest thing before I close this series for tonight, and I urge folks to please talk about this a little more and get me some more content for the series. I'm going to see if I can get this gentleman to actually come on my show, even though he does want his own show. I'm going to try to get him to come on this show and talk to him and just see from his side of the point. And then there'll be a point where I try to bring on someone from a housing setting and see if we can get the challenges of operating these type of buildings to give everybody a fair shot, hopefully. So this is going to be a series over a few weeks. And I'm actually probably going to have to do, if I do the guest, I'm probably going to have to do a special show or I'll have to figure out how to edit it. So look forward to that. I would love more discussion on this because I think it's really if you've lived in an apartment, I'd love to hear from you about these things. And um, public housing, same thing. Um, so and typically I just want to close on what public housing typically is. So this is like public housing can be run by, you know, nonprofits, or it can be run by a housing authority. And it can, it's typically low income. And it's typically, what's the other thing I was going to say about it? I'll figure it out in a minute. But it's typically, um, I'll come back to it. But let me think. was thinking. Just give me a second here. I lost my whole thought there. But public housing, um, it is run by either a nonprofit or a housing authority, um, and receives like grants from or monies from like HUD, Housing and Urban Development, or like in this building's case, United States Department of Agriculture or Department of Ag, um, and some housing authorities act as a managing agent for projects, and so on. Um, these are project based. This type of building here is known as a project based voucher, which is basically means the voucher that someone gets in here does not go anywhere. It stays right with the unit. The other thing you need to know about the vouchers is that say you get, let's say you have a partner move in with you and they have a job, or your job is such that your income can go through the roof. What I mean by go through the roof is that basically it'll kick the voucher. Um, and it means the apartment is not subsidized anymore. Um, and that could be an issue. Um, and so, just so you know, that because it has income limits on how much one can make in these type of buildings. So, just so you're aware of that when you come into these. Um, so, and as I said, and depending on, some buildings come with different amenities, um, and some, depending on your funding source, will depend on um, what is allowed to, happen as far as your income and how you can deduct certain expenses off of your rent. For instance, in my case, I can deduct healthcare expenses, um, and that are a certain percentage. So, you know, um, I think that those are some advantages. Um, and there's the other advantage, of course, of public housing is that it houses people. Um, but there's just so much dynamic to it that I wanted to start the series tonight. We'll continue it as we go, and I urge people to get a hold of me through the Facebook page or through here. I don't think the chat stays on after I'm done with the show, so I think there's like a comment section you can go into. All right, so we're going to close that section for tonight. I am going to talk with my buddy and see if he wants to come on the show or if I can find a way where we can, because I would love to talk with him more and get his take and then figure out a way to bring in some others around it. And if you're in the type of work and you can do it, reach out to me and I'd be willing to talk with you as well. I'm not Chris Matthews or I'm not looking to grill anybody here. This is about education. And I think it's just really important. And as I said, my buddy inspired me when he called me up last week to really tell me about his issue with a loud neighbor. And there's some other things about, public housing that I think you'll find interesting. So stay tuned to more of this as we go forward and be sure to reach out. Okay, where did I say we were going? Okay, yeah, now I know where we're going. First Amendment. Okay, time to jump into the First Amendment, right? First Amendment of what, right? First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Okay, and we can all laugh about it. Jimmy Kimmel was suspended off the air, and there's all kinds of, issues around the First Amendment. But I wrote a piece about this, wrote comments about First Amendment. And let me talk to you about this. I love the First Amendment. I value the First Amendment, and you should too. Um, and when you say, when I hear people say, I have a First Amendment right to do this, um, what does that really mean? And what does it typically cover? And I'm only gonna not going deep dive into what it covers. I am going to talk about some basics of what it's meant to do. Um, but what it, you know, what is curious is I hear about this all the time. Well, you're violating my First Amendment rights during a Facebook argument. That's not covered. Okay, just to give me an example, Facebook social platforms are not covered on the First Amendment. That's not it. Um, but what is it is what I'm about to get into. And before I jump into the pool here, any of you folks who are about to get upset about it or think it's politics, it's education tonight. Okay, I'm not interested in politics. I already had one person tell me that they don't do debates. That's fine, that's their choice. They're missing a lot. Um, but let's talk about what this covers. So, as we know, Jimmy Kimmel said some stuff and it upset some people. All right. So, the FCC chairman said, in a sense, implied through his, we're going to do this, you can do this the easy way or the hard way, that something needed to be done with Jimmy Kimmel. Uh, so, um, and the FCC chairman went on to say if something wasn't done, in so many words, that the FCC would be very busy for the next few months. So Nexstar, I believe it's what they're called, Nexstar and Sinclair, who own a bunch of TVs to ABC affiliates, didn't want to carry Kimmel anymore and pressed ABC. And ABC initially said, you know what, we're going to indefinitely, you know, preempt you. And so the issue around this that folks who don't do debates and don't want to really get involved in this need to, listen for and hear, if not at all, but really understand is this is what the First Amendment is right here. Is the fact that the government, through the FCC chairman, indicated we can do this the hard way or the easy way. And saying, if something's not done, the FCC would be busy, as in, taking licenses or whatever else they want to do. That is a government action, and that is an attempt to silence somebody, which the First Amendment is around government interference, around freedom of speech. It is not around anything else but that. It also goes around expression, which is interesting too. But I want to talk about that whole point right there. That is what the First Amendment is about. So the next time you say, well, my First Amendment rights are being violated by my boss who fired me because I got upset about something and or I made an opinion about something and they fired me and they're violating my First Amendment rights to speak up. Well, no, the boss did not do that. Now, uh, the thing about the First Amendment is it's also not absolute. So, for instance, you can't. There's certain things you can't do, like yell fire in a movie theater. Um, that But that is why we have a court system and all that jazz to figure that all out. But I want to just point out tonight, as we see these small assaults these assaults on the First Amendment, what it's about. And And it's really interesting where this can go. Um, and so the next time you say, well, my First Amendment right to violate, make sure that you understand what that's about. Um, because it's not because, next time you're in a Facebook argument, like last week, I saw someone say their First Amendment rights were being violated during a Facebook argument. That's not it. Or if a moderator takes down a post, does that violate someone's First Amendment rights? It does not. It's a social media post that is their group. They can do that. They're not the government. So that's different. It has to do with the government saying what you can say, what you can't say. That's when it gets really sticky. And that's what's behind the First Amendment. Okay, so good news for those of you who have been following. Jimmy Kimmel was restored to his show. And as of tonight, I learned that Sinclair and Nexstar, I believe is what it's called, have decided to re-carry Jimmy Kimmel. And so there you go. We're going back to this regular thing, but we need to keep vigilant on these constitutional rights and amendments and also research what they're about before we use them. Okay, let's jump into, I've got a couple things. So I want to jump into the looming government shutdown, and then we're going to look at self-care. Oh boy, what a ride self-care is going to be. But okay, let's jump into what, oh man, I can't wait to actually get you folks back in here and maybe get you in here to chat. I put out the show, but I don't know if people will see it or not because I put links out. You know how that is. But let's get into the looming government shutdown a little bit. I want to talk about education. I'm not going to talk about politics of it. What will it mean? And where did it come from? I just was talking about this last night. A government shutdown was first conceived and used. First of all, what is it? So, what would be a government shutdown? Well, many of you say, "Oh, I already know what it is," but let's just dive into it briefly. The United States government typically does not have a smooth process as far as a it would be great if they had a budget every year and they just approved it in a yearly and it's perfect, right? Well, sometimes it's not, and it's done through what's called a continuing resolution or a CR. And what can happen, which started happening in 1995, on and off from 1995 until now. I can give you the scope. That's when we started seeing it. Basically, what happens is on a certain, like in this case, it'll be October 1 is the new fiscal year for the government. So they have to have a CR passed by that point, or the government, in theory, shuts down because Congress and the president are not able to reach a deal on it, and or the CR just sits. The government would shut down. Um, it's This was never tried prior to my knowledge to 1995. If someone else has a different date, they can certainly send it over to me. But we all remember the 1995 one, and then there was another attempt in the mid 2010s. Another one occurred. Um, and then another one in 2019. Um, so, what happens with a United States government shutdown? Well, typically, a couple things that y'all need to be aware of. One is that non-essential personnel are usually furloughed out, furloughed. Um, and but in this case, if this shutdown occurs, there could be not furloughed. Let me think. Sorry, they're furloughed out they um, until they resolve it, and then they get a back pay from Congress. That's how that works. However, if you're essential, you are still required to work without pay until this thing is figured out. That's what the understanding is. And I need people to understand this part really carefully because it's something no one probably knows, and that's the issue. The 2019 shutdown was quite significant. It took a while for them to figure it out, and it nearly compromised, in my opinion. It almost compromised a little bit certain things. There was concern around it compromising housing programs. Food safety was possibly starting to get compromised a little bit, or at risk, I should say, at risk of being compromised because of the way the systems work. And when you don't have a smooth running system, things like these things can happen. So, what did it take to end that shutdown? 2019 was curious. It took a few controllers from LaGuardia Airport not showing up for work, air traffic controllers. They ended. We've had a couple close calls with government shutdowns, but they were averted. Um, this one doesn't sound like it's going to be averted. So certain critical services certain services would continue, but others would be delayed or stopped completely. And just what this causes is a lot of frustration and a lot of finger pointing. And you know, it's just one of the things I remember being very frustrated in the 2010s when this happened. And I wrote very clearly that both sides should work together to avoid doing this because it's disruptive. I've gotten into arguments about this in the last 24 hours, and just had to agree to disagree with these people because I just don't think it's a good bargaining chip to use. You want to fight to preserve healthcare premium, money. I'm not so sure using the government shutdown is you know, a good avenue to do that with. But I'm probably in the minority because last time I had, people saying, yeah, you know what, use it. It's the only weapon. Shut it down anyway because, things are going to hell anyway. The reality is, no, you don't really want to go there. But unfortunately, it does appear we're going to go there. So, what is going to be the difference with this one? I think what's really important to understand, I don't know, we don't know for sure, but we do know that there have been indications that, instead of furloughing the workers, they would actually be laid off. And I don't know if there would be a court battle for that. But there's just so much disruption with it. Um, you know, and so I'm very hopeful that both parties will come together. And I had someone say, well, but they don't need the Democrat votes. The Republicans just need to step up and do it. Well, okay, but y'all are both there for a purpose, for your people. This isn't, you know, and I again worry that we're using the wrong mechanism here. We're talking about shutting down your government, not a delay. It would be a significant disruption, especially under this administration. I would be reluctant to do something like this. Um, but that's just me, and that's what's nice about looking at it from both sides. As I say, I had a friend call me right up after I commented last night about this stuff, and we had a conversation. And I do see his side. I see it, but I still see that somebody needs to do the right thing. That's what they need to do. And the right thing is to keep the government open. It's not to worry about healthcare premiums right now. That's where I'm standing. You want to talk about a clean bill. This isn't politics, it's education. Understand this. A clean bill. And yet you want to decide to put your healthcare premium concerns because these are healthcare. What's at stake is Democrats have decided to use this point to try to preserve the the Affordability Care Act premium assistance money that helps pay these premiums. They're due to expire, and I'm not using the right word, but I think y'all know what I'm talking about. They're due to expire in December. So at this point, Democrats have decided to insert and say we want that figured out. And I'm not so sure this is a good time to do that. And of course we've got 3 or so more years of this type of thing. So we're probably going to go through this again, up and down, because this is only an extension for a longer term approach. If this is approved, this is only until November 21, and we're back there again. This is where you might want to consider inserting your healthcare premium thing. Because what I said in my comments, and it wasn't really received by my friend because he believes, like everyone else, which I understand, the Republicans control it so they can have an effect. That's true. But sometimes we have to do the right thing. The right thing here is to keep your government open, and not use this as a bargaining chip. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Unfortunately, not everybody agrees. And the last government shutdown, people were downright, digging in, saying, yeah, actually allow it to shut down. And, I am not a fan of it. And I don't think you should be a fan of it either. I think that what is at risk is this. How long would you tolerate a government shutdown for? Because your services would be at risk. Your services. And it could be as simple as, going to the national park, or going to, there's all kinds of different things you need to look at. You should think about before the. Of course, we actually have no real control over whether we don't have control. Our friends in Washington have more control over it than we do. But we are constituents. So that in reality conveys power. So we will see where we're going to be at here, okay? Because right now it doesn't look good, folks. Just trying to think. So the first is going to be next Wednesday. So on Tuesday night, we better see something around midnight on Wednesday morning. By midnight, I think Wednesday morning is that cutoff. So, we need to see something. So just give that some thoughts, and hopefully this was helpful. Um, let's get into self care. So let's see where we're at. My goodness, we're kicking along. Self care. How have you been doing with self care this week? I haven't been on for a while. This is my first return back um, for a while, and I don't even know. I have to look and figure out my shows here because I've been on for a while. So, self care. How's it been going? What have you been up to with it? I have to confess that my wellness table needs to be re. Yeah, I need to actually get it back together because it's kind of falling apart. I mean, it does have the have stuff inside it, but the tabletop needs to be I need to put the stuff back on the tabletop. So I've kind of slid away from it. But self care is more important than ever, and you know it's really important as we go through these rough times. So how am I doing news cycle wise? So my I'm listening to NPR every morning right now. So I had my friend was talking about I need to be careful about mainstream media. I actually get my news through different sources. It's not just NBC, ABC, CNN. I've gotten my news from like BBC, NPR, um, and various different outlets throughout the country and throughout the world. And you should try that too. It's amazing. I actually watched a few shows down in Australia, and boy, they're brutal down there. Um, but yeah, because each country has its version of conservative. And wow, I was watching this show down in Australia, and I was like, ooh, I wasn't down in Australia. I was watching a show based in Australia, and I was like, wow, awesome. Wow. Okay. So you get your news from different sources. I'm probably going to end up, mixing it up, as I always do. And I think that that's important. Um, have I been able to get any trips in this year? Not yet. Not really. I usually get a Washington trip in to kind of revitalize me, but that's not in the playbook. I have a retreat coming up, so I'm hoping that'll help me revitalize a little bit. But I'm kind of missing that revitalization trip that I was used to, where we would go down to Washington D.C. every June or June. We'd go down to D.C. and do some rallies, and it was just very nice to be able to get away and do that and come back energized. I talked about this in a hangout meeting. Um, and what I was talking about is I was concerned that, particularly for peer providers like outreach providers like me and others, we're losing some valuable spaces where we were able to go and revitalize, to retrain ourselves. Where you go to conferences, you would go. We had a conference for many years known as for peer supporters, peer support people, folks who could go attend these conferences. I attended, I want to say, three alternatives conferences. That's what the conference was called, alternatives. One was in Washington, one was in Buffalo, and one was online, virtual, which I thought was awesome. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find alternatives. They seem to have disappeared off the radar for right now. But I'm hoping for new spaces. Now, Washington County Mental Health held the Peer Palooza in June, and that's sort of a nice start. And we're trying to find other spaces as well. But these are important spaces for us to be able to go out and do these things where we can learn from other folks. And, um, so that's part of a self care. Um, you know, and so I just want to tell you that's where it's at. The downside with summers in Vermont is that they are just very short. I, we're now into fall, um, at the end of September. So, like I was out taking one of the self cares I like to do is take pictures. And today I went out and, I was out already to an appointment. So I took a series of pictures, foliage pictures. Okay. This is what I do. And at some point, I'll probably go up to the college and take my yearly round of pictures up there. That's been a routine that I do in the fall. I was taking a trip to get someone last week in Windsor, and the trees had not turned down there yet, but they have turned really good up here. Um, so that is a point of self care that I love is taking pictures. Um, what does your self what does your self care look like? Okay, um, and think about that as we go about. Um, I am going to figure out. I'm still thinking about a way to get this show on more often. JD Green over at Air It Out would love to see me on every day, and I would have to carve out some time to do that. I may end up doing every day. We'll see. But as I said, a show you can look forward to at some point in we're going to try for mid-October, I think, at this point. But it's going to be on Orca, so I have to set that up. And it's going to be with a guest. His name's David Hinault. So you can look forward to that show. Um, and maybe even more appearances on Orca and on here. So we'll see. Right now, I'm trying to appear weekly and special reports. So let me know what you'd like to see, and what kind of coverage you'd like to actually explore. Like I'm offering this public housing coverage a little bit, kind of give education, but is there a topic you would like to explore? Let me know. And we can do that. And you can do that a number of ways. As I said, you can go to the Facebook page that's in the chat, and I'm going to actually put that on the outside of this as well. There's going to be there should be a comment area outside this, outside the chat, which is when you first see the show, when you come on, to YouTube and you click the link, you'll see a comment area. That'll be your area to put comments on when I'm not live. You'll put comments in there. The nice thing about Facebook Live is it allows you to put comments in there after. So that's a little different, folks. And I like this because it doesn't freeze up on me. I had this happen with Facebook so many times. All right. So let me see where we are at. We are almost 10 minutes out of time. And I'm just going to check the chat. No, we don't have anybody, and I'm not surprised. But I would love to get people in here on a weekly basis, to chat, be in the chat and engage. And I'm back with it. So I appreciate that. Let's think here real quick. I just want to think about what's coming up. Yeah. So you might see some coverage from me on Tuesday. Look at the Facebook page, for these latest updates and special coverage for different things. That's what the Facebook page is about. Let me just throw that back in there again in case you don't see it as we go about. And I'm actually going to put it in the outer comments as well so people can see that. There you go. You're going to see that again. Yeah. So it's been a wonderful time this evening. I have a lot of different things I'll be doing this weekend for self care. By the way, it looks like I'm going to be spending the weekend doing some laundry and cleaning. So before, getting ready for my retreat on Sunday and Monday. So I um, look forward to that. In closure tonight, I would like to do a shout out again to JD Green um, for helping me think about the possibilities of this show and his invite for me to come back to his show studios anytime. I did an interview with JD earlier this week on Tuesday. Um, Risked my scooter with that interview, by the way. But the scooter's running again. But it was raining that day and it got wet. So, and I also want to thank the person who helped me get home that day when the rain hit the scooter just right. And I waited for a few hours to see if it would dry out. It didn't. So I asked for help. This gentleman came along and he helped me out. So I thank him for doing that because that involved pushing me back home. So I wanted to finally give a shout out to, and I did this on JD's show too. So I want to give a shout out to Christ Church tonight for their continued work with the homeless folks who they are working with in a encampment that is set up in their parking lot. I cannot um, begin to thank you folks enough for hosting that and us being able to work together. And also, I want to thank the other churches for what they do, but I really am very particularly interested in thanking Christ Church. Christ Church has also hosted other things over the years, and that includes the day shelter for folks during the day. Um, that happened last winter season. They also hosted the oh my goodness, the shelter, temporary shelter in Montpelier, that was open a couple years. Sorry, opened in 2022 to 2023. And they did that, and they've done some other things. Plus, they did a soup kitchen for a long time, with like the other churches. But this church just seems to have really, you know, done a lot now because they are actually doing a lot of the work. Hosting this is no small task, by the way. So I want to give thanks to them. I want to give thanks to everybody who's doing the work. It is very challenging work, and anyone who wants to join the effort, please reach out. There's plenty of ways. And so, thank you, everybody. And with that, folks, it's time to wrap up for this show. I am going to try to be back on a regular schedule here. I haven't decided when it will happen. Particularly again, I like Sunday nights, so it's possible I could come back here. No, actually, you know what? It's not going to be this Sunday night. No, it's not going to be this Sunday night because I'm preparing for the retreat. Um, so I um, will be coming back to you. It will be a week from Sunday, is what I'm going to try for. And look for special coverage between that. But thank you for tuning in. Um, and be sure to give me any feedback you want. You'll need to do it in the comments um, below. It won't be in the chat. It will be in the comments section. When you first are watching this show, you'll need to put the comments there. And I'll start us off so you can see it. And that is where you'll need to do that, or visit the Facebook page. Um, and go from there. All right. I am Zach Hughes. Um, and this has been another beautiful show of Hot Topics. And guess what, folks? It is time for me to go. I am Zach Hughes. This has been Hot Topics. I am out of here.